Now that we've made the USB stick, we're going to actually do the install of FreePBX on a machine. So I'm going to take this USB stick and plug it in the back of the machine, and then we're going to tell the machine to boot from this USB stick so that we can get started with our installation. All right, so what I'm going to do right now is I'm going to plug in the Thinkserver that I'm using here, and I'm going to have the video output plugged into the capture card so that you can see exactly what I do throughout the install. So first things first is to plug it in and turn this thing on. So it's plugged in. We're going to hit power. Now, the first thing you want to do when you want to boot off install disk is you're supposed to hit F7, F8, F9, F12. On every one of these computers, it's usually a different button, but it's usually F7, F8, F9, F12. If you're not sure which it is that you're supposed to hit, you can just do what I always do. What I usually do is I just hit every single button and just, pray that one of them works. And that worked over here. So we're going to boot from my USB disk drive, which is this first option. Click that. Now, I'm going to go with full install advanced, no RAID. I do plan on copying this over. So I'm using just one drive right now while I'm actually waiting for two drives to show up that I'm going to put in RAID. But I'm going to be using the Lenovo's hardware RAID instead of using the FreePBX setup here for it. So let's just wait for this to load. Hopefully this loads quickly. It's a USB 3 stick. I used to use USB 2 sticks for this, but it's just painful how slow they can be. All right, so we're going to do a manual configuration of the IP address. Enable IPv6 support. Now here's the thing. The reason I'm doing manual configuration of IP, and this is important, is I'm going to set up these phones. Every single phone in the office is going to be set up to talk to the PBX. So this phone has to register with the PBX. It has to sign in with the PBX to get its extension. So this is my phone. This is extension 401, which is my phone at my business. But it knows it's 401 because it sends its login credentials, says here's my extension is 401 to the PBX, and then it tells the PBX this is the password for it. But in order for it to talk to the PBX, it has to know where the PBX is. So I'm going to tell the phone, here's the IP address of the PBX. And if the IP address of the PBX changes, then it's going to change this entire thing, and it's going to make it a nightmare. The phone's not going to be able to connect to the PBX. So I want the PBX to have a static IP address in this case. So we're going to go and do manual. I want the PBX to be 192.168.2.5. Now again, you can do all sorts of crazy stuff. Where you can set it to the MAC address of the PBX. Will only that'll only get a specific IP. You can do all sorts of crazy stuff. But here I'm just going to keep it simple by giving it a static IP. I'm just going to keep things very basic here. So now here it's going to ask you for a root password. Don't choose like your name or 1234 or your birthday or any of that shit. So we're going to now for which type of installation. Again, I'm going to be very simple here. I'm just going to delete everything on the drive. I'm clicking use all space. I'm not creating some crazy custom layout. This is going to be fine for 99% of the people who are using this, I would say. Now we have to choose what disk we want to install to. Do I want to install to my SanDisk USB drive, or do I want to install to the internal hard drive? I want to install to the internal hard drive. I don't want to install to the SanDisk USB for obvious reasons. So we're going to click next, and it's going to create a file system. Now the install, again, the speed of the install is going to be totally based on whether you're using a fast hard drive and a fast installation medium, or whether you're using a slow hard drive and a DVD. So this is kind of like middle of the road. This is a standard 1 terabyte modern drive and a $30 USB stick from Amazon. It's going to get stuck around package, I think 430 or 440. That's where it's installing the FreePBX GUI interface. That has the most files. So around 440, you're going to see it get stuck for a little bit, especially if you're doing it off DVD. Don't restart the install. It didn't freeze if you don't see the packages moving up. When you get to 440, it's supposed to be slow. Again, if you have SSDs in your PBX and an SSD install disk, maybe not, but for the rest of the world, it'll be slow. Yeah, so I most likely fast forwarded past that part because I was sitting here for about 5 minutes waiting for it to install, and I just didn't feel like subjecting you to that. But yeah, it didn't go that fast for me. It took about a good 5 or 10 minutes for that to move past package 440. All right, so the installation is done, and now it's rebooting. So let's just see what happens when it reboots. First thing we have to do actually is make sure it's set to not boot off of the damn USB stick, which means I should unplug the USB stick. That would be the smart thing to do here. But since that's far away and I have a wired microphone today, we're just going to set it to boot manually into this. Okay. But yes, if you're smarter than me, you'll unplug the USB stick when the install is finished and it reboots so it doesn't have a boot loop. Linux is confused. It doesn't understand. Why are you? Does not seem to be a monitor that I'm attached to. This may surprise you, but PBXs don't usually have support for being attached to high definition DisplayPort capture hardware. This is not exactly the intended video display device for a FreePBX server, but yeah. So it's booting, it's booting. All right, so at the top of the screen, you see where it says testing for internet access test passed. That means that the settings that I entered for the network worked. This is very important because if it does not pass that test, you're not online and you'll have to troubleshoot what you did wrong or what's wrong with your network. So the first things first, this thing has to have an IP address. This is not meant to be administered with a keyboard, a mouse, and a monitor. This is meant to be administered remotely. So you set this up, and then once you set it up, you unplug the monitor, the keyboard, and all that, and the whole idea is you don't touch this thing. You're going to administer it using a web interface from another computer. So right now it's just updating all the modules, checking if there's anything new, which is a good thing. It's checking, for all you know, you downloaded the image or the ISO a few weeks ago, and there's been some security patches for things. We're going to get into that when I talk about backups, but one of the important things when it comes to backups with these systems, if you have a backup from a 3 or a 4 or a 5-year-old system and you try to restore everything from that backup, and it's an older version of Asterisk, an older version of FreePBX, an older version of CentOS, what you're going to find is that your restoration may be partially functional or some of it works, but the interface is kind of clunky. So what I would recommend that you do, if you want to be 100% sure that when you restore from a backup that it'll work, I would suggest that you take the ISO or the image file that you use to install FreePBX, that you take that file and you actually save it along with the backup so that you can install the same version that you had, just so that you can see all your settings and, just to be able to copy everything out of it. I'm not saying that you have to be stuck on the old version, but this is helpful if you're in an environment where you really want to be back up and running ASAP immediately and, worry about migrating to a new version once the disaster is no longer there. So for myself, if the system died, ideally I could just get it back up and running exactly as it was as quickly as possible, and then at 3 or 4 in the morning when I'm not worrying about incoming phone calls, then migrate to a newer version. Anyway, this is going to take a minute or two to update all FreePBX modules. And don't log into the interface and don't start setting stuff up until this is done. Because the thing is, the web interface is actually going to work before this is done. It's bad practice to have parts of the software that you're using updating while you're editing configuration files and accessing things. It's going to turn into a mess very quickly. So wait for this to finish first. Okay, so after this is done, I'm just going to reboot the machine just to make sure that everything in it actually works. Just to make sure that nothing was destroyed. Log in, reboot. And once this is done, we're going to go into the interface. It's not necessarily required that you reboot. I just want to know that nothing failed while it was updating and installing things. You see a couple of failed there. It says shutting down UPS monitoring. I don't have the Linux kernel set up to monitor a UPS right now, so it is going to fail because it's not something I've set up. So we'll wait for the Thinkserver. It's going to boot automatically in 4 seconds. It's going to complain about my HDMI audio unsupported device. Again, that's just Linux being very confused that I have my PBX machine, which is meant to be a text server thing, plugged into a DisplayPort capture hardware just so I can do this video. But you can totally ignore that. You'll probably never see that error in the real world because you're never going to be plugging your PBX into a capture card. All right, it's booted, and that's it. So you've installed FreePBX. See? Not as hard as the cloud service providers tell you it is. So now what we're going to do after this is we're going to set up, we can actually go into the web interface and just click around a little bit, and we're going to get started setting up the Voice Pulse account that we created with FreePBX so that we can get our SIP trunking working. SIP trunking is when the PBX itself is going to register with the phone services provider so that it can actually, see that we're receiving calls, place calls to the public switch telephone network,